Hey guys, what's going on? Thanks for tuning in to Forward Obsessed. I'm really excited to have my college friend and innovation champion doing amazing work, Cate Johnson. So Cate, thank you for coming here. This is mildly awkward having you on camera, but this is awesome.
It's great to be here.
So I want to talk a little bit about your journey. Cate's doing some amazing, incredible work. She's worked with organizations from MIT to NASA. You've spoken and worked on conferences at South by Southwest. So to say that you've traveled the world would really, quite literally, be an understatement. I'm really excited to have you here at District on this Forward Obsessed episode. Could we just start a little bit, kind of introduction about who you are and how did you get into becoming an innovation champion?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
So my story really begins here in Connecticut. My family's from Connecticut. I went to UConn with you. And New England is really home to me. So I grew up in Maine, just a couple hours from here. And I feel most at home when I'm in the woods. So nature was a really important part of my childhood, how I define where home is, and kind of the first inspiration into kind of creativity for me. I grew up in a home where my mom had a bachelor's in music, my sister had a bachelor's in art studio. There are all these artists around me, and I felt the one that wasn't creative. And it wasn't until I learned about design and then doing more about kind of nature and design that I realized I was incredibly creative, but my inspiration was different than painting or a piece of music.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. So the thing that kind of moved me the most about a lot of our conversations is just the way you think about energy and creativity. I think is fundamentally different. We're all exposed to the same kind of design thinking frameworks, but what I love about what Cate talks about is this idea of sort of unlabeling is something that I think brought us together. We talked probably about a year ago, and we were just catching back up on the past 8 years and where our lives had gone, and nature kept coming up. And one of the things you're going to be speaking about on the speaking gig tonight is around this thing, biomimicry. So I remember Cate brings up biomimicry, and I'm like, that sounds like some sci-fi Blade Runner type stuff. Like, what is that? And naturally, she starts to explain it to me, and then I felt the need to write about it, referenced her, and now people are writing in saying, who's Cate? Let's talk to her, and here we are. So What the hell is biomimicry?
So biomimicry, in a definition state, is...
Or what's it to you?
So biomimicry to me is being inspired by design of nature, and that nature is perfect design in a way. You think about, and what I really, like, why I love it is, to me, design is about getting all different people, all different thoughts around a table, getting them involved in the process. And because I love nature so much, I'm inspired by it, I realized at a certain point, I'm like, could I ideate with nature? I can empathize with nature. Like, how do I bring in nature to a different part of the design process?
Wow.
And so I kind of stumbled upon it in a way that was really kind of organic. And what I discovered was that there's a Biomimicry Institute, there's tons of research about it. All these products and services and experiences are already being designed with nature. Like, this is not something I came up with, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so there's this great quote that says, if the world is 3.8 billion years old, that means that everything that's living has been iterated through evolution for billions of years.
Wow.
So when you think about a product cycle, can you imagine having that many iterations? Like, of course, this is perfect design. Like, look at the world around us.
That's wild.
And whenever I get really, kind of depressed or, concerned about the world, and something that my friend Annika said is, if I go for a walk in nature, if I go somewhere and you just look and see what happens naturally, it's incredible.
Yeah, river doesn't know that it has to flow. It just flows.
Yeah, it's just look at these mountains and these trees, and how did this happen? And they're gorgeous, and they make you feel good. And so to me, it just I just naturally leaned into it. And it brings me a lot of joy.
No, I love that. What's interesting for the audience that might be sort of looking at this going, all right, what are these two new agey people talking about? What I think is interesting is, the billionaire Ray Dalio, who started Bridgewater here in Connecticut, talks a lot about the laws of nature in his book Principles. So to say that the laws of nature and biomimicry are something that all walks and talks of professionals can sort of take advantage of and get inspired by, I think is an understatement. I'm sure you agree, but you're biased to that probably. So we're talking about biomimicry, the sort of power of nature, the wonder of nature. We talked a lot about language, right? And just as designers, we think a lot about using language as a tool to unstuck or unstick people from kind of being blocked, whether it be energetically or creatively or just being afraid to speak up and sort of say their piece. Mm-hmm. What I want to talk a little bit about is just how that curiosity, clearly something that you've had your whole life, how that curiosity has started to form for you in the business settings, right? So you've worked with some of the most world-renowned companies in the world and all over the world, right? In the third world and the second world and that sort of thing. I'd love to hear, when you think about energy, when you think about curiosity, how does that show up for you? And where does that show up for you?
In language.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that I'm really grateful that is happening right now, of being able to talk more openly about privilege, about diversity, that there is a value of equity in the workplace, in businesses. Okay. And I'll say from United Way and the transformation that they're going through to become a digital organization, to NASA and them helping to set the 2030 goals and how they're going to reach them.
2030.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is bonkers, but it's like almost here. Everyone's having the same problems, right? It's a lot of cultural transformation is what's really happening at these organizations. And for me, one of my values is diversity, and that I really do believe that more diverse thought brings out better outcomes. And there's a lot of research about that, right? That's not an unpopular opinion. But to me, it's put me into a space where I've had to better examine my privilege, my identity, where I come from. And I'm going to talk about this later today, but, we did this whole thing with Ancestry.com over the holidays with my family, and we can trace back my family 500 years in Connecticut.
Really? Wow.
To just 20 minutes up the street from where we are.
That's crazy.
And that's crazy. And then it's also that, when they got that land, which is Johnson Road, just my last name.
Wow.
There was Native American trade as part of the deal. Right? And that I have white landowners as part of my history, and they took that land from someone. And so recognizing that is a part of my story, and that is something that I stand on, and something that is both, to me, unacceptable, but also true. But we need to be having these conversations, right? I love that now, we can say here are my pronouns, right? That am I cis or not cis?
Yeah.
There are these new things that, 2 years ago, we would never have this conversation. To me, that helps us bring out more diversity, more equity, hearing voices that we haven't heard, and hopefully more proportionally going forward.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question. So I want to go really deep into that, because I love where you just took that as per usual. I'd say it's surprising maybe to you guys watching, but not surprising to me. As a creative, I'm working with people from all walks and talks of life, irrespective of any of the typical labels or, whether it be gender or sex or background and thought. The question I would ask is, by nature of the tribes that we form, whether on purpose or not, a lot of people watching this video are going to look like me, right? Hopefully not all of them, but a lot of them are going to look like me just based on the tribes that I've developed over living here in Connecticut. My question is, how can I, as a, white person of privilege, if you will, white guy, 6 feet tall, how can I champion this topic in a way that, you've known me for, 15, 20 years? How can I be authentically Pete without sort of seeming like a buzzword chaser? But I want to understand, knowing me, help the audience understand what we can do to help with that as well.
Yeah. So thanks for asking that. I think that's a really important topic. And two things come to mind. So one is very practical, and the other is more conceptual, and just something that I think helps describe what this all is. So there's something called the Privilege Walk, which is a really artfully facilitated experience that you really it needs to be done really well for it to come out. But the idea is that you have a group of people, and they stand, in a line, and you ask questions, and whether they've experienced that or not, they take a step forward or a step back. Generally, over the course of the experience, what happens is it segments out into gender, race, sexuality, a lot of different things. And the idea is that you look who's around me, who's on my level, who's ahead of me, who's behind me. And it's really interesting to see kind of how that happens. So I think there's that experience, which again is you can kind of describe it, but to experience it is
so I can
really
just
special.
Google that and find a local related.
So find someone who's really talented at facilitating something like that, who does D&I work.
Cool.
That could be really lovely. And
Very cool.
yeah, and then the second is, and this is something that I've realized a lot, being white and having two parents who went to college. I have an MBA, like I have so much privilege, right? I need to start naming it. And so to me, the first step is that whatever is the norm doesn't have to get said. Like you don't have to say that you're not gay, right? Because the norm is that you're straight. And so like it's only gay people that have to say that they're gay. And so it's
interesting.
I've started saying like, hi, I'm Cate. I'm a cis woman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. As like anyone who wants to be like, if my pronoun was theirs, like it shouldn't be just them that have to state that. And so to me, like that's just a leveling. And it's also opening and embracing that like, this is who I am and I want to just like show some of that. It's not all inclusive, but then it also invites people to say, oh, well then let me share with you my identity.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I thank you for that. You know, for me, it feels like this whole thing is just an API in a language that I don't know how to code in yet, right? So as a technologist and engineer, it's like, all right, how do I get behind that world? Because it's like, it's very foreign to me, to be really, really honest in a lot of ways. Yeah,
and I think just like lean into it. Like you're a pretty authentic, vulnerable person. And so I think trying it in small settings, like don't be like, I'm going to webcast this to 4 million people and we're going to try this out. But see what works for you. Like all of this stuff is super personal. So
no, I agree. And that's super helpful. So we talked a lot about, for me, I just expressed some curiosity to you, right? Which is a topic that came up that I wasn't sort of kind of ruminating on until you mentioned it, and now I jumped on it. We're building. A big part of design thinking is sort of this idea of yes and, right? So I want to talk about one of the big things that you feel is your competitive advantage, which is happiness, right? You feel like happiness is both your competitive advantage and others. How is happiness a competitive advantage for starters?
So I think happiness is a competitive advantage, period. Like it's doesn't just belong to me. Like it just
what's a competitive advantage for some of the folks watching that
Yeah.
might not be as into this business model lingo as we are?
So I'm like, it's very MBA of me to be like, value proposition.
Yeah, exactly.
So to me, competitive advantage is what makes you uniquely able to be successful.
Okay.
And look around, like not everyone's happy, right? So that is unique, right? And to me, it's not that I'm happy 24/7, but that I realize that there are advantages to happiness. And I came upon this whole idea of the happiness advantage from an incredible TED Talk and researcher named Sean Archer. And he's done so much to study happiness and positive psychology. And
that's so cool.
The whole idea behind it is that in our culture, in American culture, in the US, we think like, okay, I will be happy if I get this job, if my body looks like this, if I have this relationship, like, and then I'll be happy. But what all of his research uncovered is that actually having and again, going back to science, if your brain is at a positive state versus a neutral or a negative state, you are more creative, more resilient, more successful. Like doctors were better at diagnoses.
Wow.
People were like 30% better at sales. Like all of the indicators went up. And so it's not that you should wait to be happy to get all these things. Being happy will help you get all of the things or do all of the things or whatever. So to me, like that's when I think of my competitive advantages, I take time out to do things and be things that bring me joy and bring me happiness.
I love that. The term I've been using a lot when sort of mentoring, I do a lot of mentoring as you know, but is this idea that you can't pour from your cup until it's until it's full, right? So the question, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I know that you're very good at ambiguity and dealing with it, is the other day we were talking about this idea of the things we're going to talk about today on this episode. And one of the things that Katie from my team came up with was this idea of a positivity scan. So can you sort of lead us through the making? I'm not going to ask you to do one right now per se, but if I want to go and do a positivity scan to assess where I'm at, how would I do that? And tell the audience right behind my head over here.
Sure. So to me, positivity scan or any of that, like trying to get a read on where you are to tap into, it starts with being grounded. So, a lot of the research around positive psychology, there are habits to happiness.
Okay.
And so I think there are 7 in Sean's book, and we're going to practice some of them tonight during the talk. And to me, the first step is just breathing, being still, being present. I think it's really easy to get lost in the moment or lost in the crazy, right? And so to me, taking that time to be still, whether that's to meditate, whether that's just to be quiet, to not be on a digital device, just anything that gives you that time, that to me is always the first step. So check in with like, how does my body feel? Like, what are the thoughts that have been going on in my head? And being able to distance yourself from, okay, these are the voices or these are the things, and like, this is my body, like, they're like, it's kind of getting a read there. So to me, that's always the start, is breathing and grounding.
So I want to ask a question. So one of the things that I feel is actually people have kind of offered maybe an insult or a critique of me in a way that doesn't feel like a compliment is, all right, people, it's really easy for you to be positive. You know, you're always so high energy, et cetera, et cetera. And one, I think that's insulting, but that's a whole separate conversation. Do you believe that we're inherently charged in a particular direction? So like, do you believe that, because from my mind goes, you know, if we're, you know, getting Taoist for a second, if we're neutral, right, neutrally charged or positively charged, negatively charged, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of like, are we naturally pulled to a particular polarity? I mean, obviously you're doing a thing or two about energy these days. Like, I'd love to just kind of geek out with you on that for a second.
Well, so I mean, there are a lot of different ways to look at that. One is like this whole thing of like, are you an extrovert versus an introvert, or like an ambivert? Like, do you go back and forth? But I also think that the way you present to the world is never a good indicator of if you're happy or not.
Right.
So there's this great card game called Connect, and it was created by a fellow at Starting Block, which is a social innovation fellowship I'm part of. And it's this deck of cards they're different layers, but it's to use in conversation, and they're kind of conversation starters. And one of them, and I did this with my family, and one of them was, what do people think about you that is not true?
Oh, I love that. And
one of my answers, actually the one that like really hit me, was that I'm happier that I am. Because I similarly, like, I present like a lot of energy, a lot of smiles. That doesn't always mean that like I feel happy.
Right.
So I think what's really important to think about with the happiness advantage is it's not what your Instagram looks like. It's not like what your face looks like. It's not even the words necessarily that are coming out of your mouth.
Right.
But what's happening inside.
Right.
Right? Because there are all these incredible examples of like Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Or
Kate
Spade. Like people that like you thought were really successful and you thought were really happy and yet weren't.
Right.
Very deeply weren't.
Yeah.
And so what I think is really critical about this is it's not about your brand. It's not about your persona. It's not about how people think about you. It's all of the stuff inside. Like, that's where that needs to happen.
I love that. And that's actually a really good bridge to what I want to talk about next, which is one of the things that you made me promise to ask you is, could you ask me some questions? So I would love to turn the tables and give you the opportunity to do that, even though I'm strangely terrified to ask questions. So go ahead. No.
Tell me about that night at UConn. I'm just kidding.
Which one? The ones that I don't remember?
Having like flashbacks.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so I'm curious because one of their first conversations, I think, beginning of last year, was when we were starting to talk about nature and design and all of this stuff. And I kind of want to circle back to that because to me that was an awesome conversation.
I love that conversation. Yeah.
And so I'm curious for you in the design of this space, like did you think about nature or the environment or any of that in how you designed the space, the experience here? Is there anything that you wish that you could incorporate that you hadn't?
Yes.
I'm just curious about that.
Absolutely.
Because this is like an incredible space.
Thank you. So one of the things I want to just first put out there is, you know, our partner in this whole thing, Urbane New Haven, really brought the vision to life. So the thing I want to speak about is my process and our process to this space, which again, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, you know, my partner Dave Salinas and the team that was really a big part of this. So what we did is we went out and we solicited feedback. We did a series of co-creation sessions where we really listened to what was the energy that we were after for the space. That inspired and informed a number of different things, ranging from the temperature of the lighting, to the gender-neutral bathrooms, to the open modular spaces that we did. In terms of materials and everything that we sourced, in certain places where possible, where budgets would allow, we did incorporate some reclaimed wood and some things of that sort. So wherever possible, we tried to play a role in that. I would have loved to see, and I think we will continue to iterate on this space because it's always, a moving target. I don't think we incorporated nature overtly as much as I would have liked to. So I think we did go with sort of a post-industrial type of feel that we wanted it to not have this over-designed perfect look, right? We wanted people to feel comfortable writing on a wall or putting art up or modifying a space or opening it or closing it to what they saw fit. So for me, the principles of the user experience and the experience of this space were largely based on what would enable play, what would enable the way we like to work, which is iterative and collaborative and open, but not fall victim to many of the things that spaces like this often fall victim to. So the acoustic technology that we had sprayed and incorporated is a state-of-the-art acoustic technology. We have the closest to natural daylight, sunlight as a lighting system. So we get these very beautiful open areas of light, natural daylight. We don't even need the lights to be on during the day, but we do have them. So I think from a lighting, from an acoustics, from a visual perspective, we took a lot of those principles into place. It's funny when you think about the answer to your question, the future iterations of the space. So we moved in back in February. It's been sort of iterating. So next month will be year one. We've already added things. So for example, modified the way that we sit, have people sit, all basically customer feedback in the case of our customer being our people, right? We've added a meditation room to be able to kind of go and retreat a bit. A lot more comfortable spaces. So one of the things that we learned was we actually had far too many conference rooms that were traditional conference rooms. A table, even though we go for round table where possible, table with chairs. The most popular conference room, which we learned because we're big data junkies, is the most popular book conference room is actually the one that has really comfy chairs and a couch. Big surprise, one would think, and I'm kidding because that was a big surprise, but in all seriousness, what we learned is it's the more comfortable spaces, the more alternative spaces from a design perspective that really resonated. So I would love to think that nature played a bigger role. What I love about this space, because of how open it is, people kind of come and go as they please. We've been incorporating a lot more plants lately, so a lot more live nature, which I think has both brightened the space up, but also given it a different vibe. There's just something nice about having plants. Oxygen actually helps, but that I've loved. We did do a live wall out in the innovation area. So I'll show you that later when we go for a walk. But I would have loved to incorporate in certain areas like moving water and a couple other things. At my house, I've got like a really cool smart fountain that I kind of rigged up with one of those lighting systems. And so before I meditate, sort of set that on. We've got some of the rooms have essential oils. So where possible, we're trying to incorporate that. One of our interns actually today posed me, and our head of creative, the nicest statement. She said, I never expected some of the things I did in this internship to happen. And I was like, can you tell me more about that? And one of the biggest things that she loved was the space and the openness and the access. So that idea of transparency, that idea of open source, while I think we can still continue to do a better job to open it up, I think that we're getting closer to unlocking some of those things. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you're talking about this, I kind of almost wanted to have like a camera looking down and like almost thinking of like the people here as like different animals and like herd migrations of like seeing like they do this in like supermarkets and other places of like where are people tracking and how are the patterns and like if I move this then what happens,
like an IR
right?
camera or something.
Cool
visualization project.
And just like thinking about like how different natural elements, like if I put a chair here versus a tree, like does that change how people are interacting, right? And there's some really cool like data or facial recognition around actually happiness and like different facial configurations and be like, are people's faces different after doing
really cool.
this? You could do some really cool like A/B testing. Here's like where my head went.
No, I love that. And this is totally set up for that because we've got a lot of the tech to be able to do that. So
and it could just be like what are faces coming in versus leaving too, right? I think about this because of so I helped to build and launch the innovation lab at United Way in their headquarters.
Right.
And it's a space that is very different than every other space in United Way. You walk into basically any other conference room and it's white walls, black table, like not even a clock on the wall, like no art. And the innovation lab, it's like colorful, like soft. There's like, I have like stuff written up everywhere. There's like, imagery. People walk in there and they're like, don't know what to do.
Because you're not used to that. That doesn't feel like a typical non-profit.
But then walking out of it, I get comments of like, wow, I never could have had that conversation in one of those other rooms.
Yeah,
Or,
I love the role that space plays. I also think that energetically, one of the things that I dislike about my power, if you will, is that it's easily misinterpreted. So the example I gave to my colleague Matt Weinberg from Dr. Media Group the other day when he was here is we're talking about lightning rods and how we're, as founders, the energy either comes or leaves with us. And the thing that I'm trying to be more mindful of is my body language. So, if I get a tough piece of news or something that has nothing to do with this place, but if it's on my face, the ripple effect of that energy, the ripple effect of that behavior, and the signal it sends. When really it's just like, I haven't eaten. I'm hungry, right?
And I empathize because I don't have a poker face. Yeah. And so like there's been a couple like all staff meetings I've been and people are like, oh my God, Cate does not like what's happening. Right. And I'm like, I don't.
You're like, yeah, exactly.
I don't. Which is great. And like I also love that about like that to me is like you're being congruent.
Right.
Like you just had an experience and you're not like trying to pretend that you didn't.
Right. Exactly.
That's also I think a really important value.
I struggle with that a bit, and I want to create some discourse, and then they're going to kick me off the stage because of time. I'm going to get you ready for the speaker. She is the speaker, by the way. But I think the interesting thing is that's where I think one of the most important things that, for me in co-creation, is having people who can be your barometer and for you to be each other's barometer. And that's what I think, like that idea of like psychological safety in teams and partnership, I really think that's missing in a lot of cases for me. Specifically, not just here at DS, but when I'm on a team where I know that someone's not afraid to tell me my hair looks messed up or, hey, Pete, are you okay? Like, I generally judge how much someone actually cares about me in life based on the questions that they ask me, right? So one of the things that I want to ask you is, one of the things I'm really focused on in 2019 is creation, both metaphorically, literally, in all areas of life. There you go. Is not too literally means that. But what I want to talk about is like, this idea of questioning capability. So how can I teach my teams who are so embedded in the skills that they have? How can I teach them to ask more effective questions, more beautiful questions that will lead to new possibilities that they didn't necessarily know were possible? Because you're an expert in questioning and language.
Well, so it's really interesting because both things that you were just talking about I think are so interwoven of there's a lot of vulnerability and you need to have, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs of like the basic needs that we need to function and like the basic is security. It's like, do I have safety, right? Like I will worry about that and before I worry about if I'm hungry or if I need a job or like anything else, right? And so what it seems like what you're asking for is a safe space, a place that you can be yourself, show whatever is happening and that people are going to take you as like the good-hearted person that you are, right? And of course you do because you're a human being, so of course you want that, right? Totally. Like of course. But so to me, being able to ask tough questions is I need to be in a space where I feel safe to be myself and be creative, right? So asking questions is an extroverted way of thinking. So I think the other thing is, and that's really interwoven here too, and it's something that my parents realized after being married for 30 years, is my dad thinks and then speaks, and my mom speaks to think. So like I describe myself, and I've started telling people this.
I'm like you, Kate's mom.
Like I think aloud. My brain doesn't process until it comes out of my body. Right? But my parents realized that like my mom was freaking my dad out because he thought everything that she said was decided, was the way. Right? Because he would wait to say the thing. But it was just their like being able to recognize their different styles of they were like, what?
Totally.
Right? So even just being able like, and I say this to people that when I start working with them of, I'm thinking aloud. This is just my brain outside of my body. I
say to my team here, so one of the big leadership mistake I ran into was this idea of, hey guys, I'm riffing right now. I'm not requesting. I'm not making any requests. So it was interesting. It's funny. I do a lot of these sketch notes, right? Kind of in preparation. Because for me, my brain works a lot in visuals and metaphors and those kinds of things. The challenge I've realized is what I noticed about myself kind of doing that evaluation when I was going through some leadership coaching is I was fucking talking way too much. I wasn't listening nearly enough.
Yeah.
So what I started to do now is when I feel the need to talk, when I'm processing, I'll process by drawing, which allows me to shut up and listen, be more present.
Yeah.
But then I don't lose out on that cognitive ability to think and process.
And so that's exactly where I was going to, of like the other thing that's so critical is that self-awareness.
Yeah.
Right? So safety and then self-awareness.
Safety and self-awareness.
Right? So, okay, I'm safe. Like I can present, I can be curious, I can be whatever. That's first. And then is like, am I asking too many questions? Am I asking the right type of questions? Right. Like, am I not letting them ask questions?
Right.
To me, like those two things, and it's an art form, so you got to work on it, you got to practice it. But I think that's what makes good questions.
Yeah, I think energy in business is a topic that is a good place to sort of fix it on for a second, in terms of kind of wrapping up segment one, if you will, which is, what are some of the problems and companies that you're excited or interested in working with? It sounds like the through line I'm hearing here is that energy and biomimicry and nature and a different way of thinking and inquiring into yourself, into your possibility and the company and the world's possibility is a big part of what it means to be an innovation champion for you. Would that say I kind of capture that?
Sure.
Okay. So with that, what are some companies or problems that you're really interested in potentially solving, just knowing that someone might be watching this right now that might have that problem?
Yeah. So there are a couple answers to that, but to me, the biggest thing that's tracking is, again, like going back to what I was talking about with NASA and United Way and all this culture stuff, is what's happening with human population and where we're living and how we're aggregating all of our resources, how we're treating the planet. So what's happening in these urban centers, what's happening with smart cities and technology that's happening there, how that's changing our interactions, and knowing how much the architecture of a space, like, you created this space, it gives you a different experience, right? It changes how you look at the world. And so how are we, in the way our population is growing and our impact, like, what does that all look like? There's so many opportunities there to solve problems, to create, to bring people together. Because the other thing that's happening at the same time is huge migration, right? Over 100 years ago, people didn't change. Like, I look at my family history and like, okay, everyone came over and then they stayed.
Yeah.
Right? And now people, because of refugee crises, because of global warming and things happening to the planet, because of resource allocation, people are moving all over.
Right.
And so then what does that mean for our cities and our infrastructure and how we move and how we share ideas?
I love that. Smart cities, energy. I love where this conversation is going. So Cate, thank you so much. Cate Johnson, how does this audience tune into you? How do they follow some of the amazing work that you are already doing and will be doing in 2019?
Cool. So you can go to my website. It's Cate B Johnson. It's Cate with a C. All of my LinkedIn, Twitter, everything is Cate B Johnson. So that's the best search tool there is. And I'm based in Washington, D.C., but I do travel all over. So if I'm ever in your city, I'd always love to grab a coffee or just go for a walk. I also love recommendations on incredible travel adventures. So if you have a cool nature thing, shout it out. I've had that happen where someone recommended one and then I took one. So closing on biomimicry, opening on biomimicry. If you've got an awesome travel adventure, definitely share it with us in the comment stream. Thanks for tuning in to Forward Obsessed with myself and Cate Johnson.